you folks? This is my home.
On November 20th, 1983, America stopped. 100 million people, nearly half the country's population, sat glued to their television screens watching the unthinkable unfold, the complete nuclear annihilation of the United States. But this wasn't a real attack. It was ABC's made-for-TV movie, The Day After. In an era when 3 networks dominated American television, ABC took an unprecedented gamble. Instead of safe, comforting entertainment, they broadcast an unflinching portrayal of nuclear holocaust centered on ordinary citizens in Lawrence, Kansas. No superheroes, no last-minute salvation, just regular Americans facing the end of civilization. The impact was immediate and profound. Switchboards at TV stations across the country jammed with distressed callers.
Over 300 missiles inbound now.
Viewing parties became impromptu therapy sessions. Children were sent to bed early. Adults couldn't sleep. And in the White House, President Ronald Reagan watched in stunned silence. What made this particular film so significant? Why did a television movie leave such an indelible mark on our cultural consciousness that people still remember exactly where they were when they watched it? And how did a single broadcast potentially change the course of the Cold War and nuclear policy? The Day After wasn't just television. It was a cultural earthquake that forced Americans to confront their deepest fears about nuclear annihilation. In an age where apocalyptic entertainment is commonplace, it's hard to comprehend how one movie could shock a nation into nuclear sobriety. Yet 4 decades later, its shadow still looms large over discussions of nuclear threat, media responsibility, and the power of television to shape public opinion. The Day After strips away Hollywood's typical disaster movie glamour to present nuclear war with brutal simplicity. Set in Lawrence, Kansas, deliberately chosen as America's heartland rather than a major coastal city, the film follows ordinary citizens as their lives are shattered by nuclear attack. Dr. Russell Oakes, Jason Robards, serves as our primary guide through this nightmare, a Kansas City physician who witnesses the missiles launching from nearby silos. As panic erupts across the region, we meet a cross-section of Middle America. College students like Stephen Klein, Steve Guttenberg, farming families like the Dahlbergs, medical professionals including nurse Nancy Bauer, JoBeth Williams, and military personnel stationed at nearby bases. There are no elaborate government conspiracies or mad generals pulling triggers, just the horrifying logic of mutually assured destruction playing out to its inevitable conclusion. Director Nicholas Meyer fought network executives to maintain the film's uncompromising vision. When the attacks come, triggered by a Soviet-American confrontation in Germany, the film doesn't cut away. Instead, viewers witness multiple nuclear detonations with stark visual effects that were groundbreaking for television. The mushroom clouds rising over the Kansas prairie, electromagnetic pulses disabling vehicles and electronics, and immediate deaths from heat and blast effects are meticulously portrayed. But these initial horrors merely set the stage for the film's most devastating sequences. What follows the bombs is far worse. Radiation sickness depicted with unflinching detail, societal collapse as infrastructure fails, and the slow death of hope as survivors realize no rescue is coming. Hospital scenes show doctors performing triage with dwindling supplies, deciding who receives care and who must be left to die. Families huddle in makeshift shelters while radiation poisoning gradually claims them. Law enforcement breaks down as desperate survivors compete for scarce resources. Unlike most disaster films where heroic figures emerge to rebuild society, The Day After offers almost no resolution or catharsis. The survivors face starvation, disease, and nuclear winter, with minimal government assistance. Communications are limited to sporadic radio broadcasts from a decimated federal government urging patience that seems cruelly misplaced. The film's power lies in this relentless realism. These aren't action heroes, but regular people like the viewers themselves, suddenly thrust into an unimaginable situation. Most shocking for 1983 network television were the graphic visuals: radiation burns causing skin to slough off, hair falling out in clumps, makeshift mass graves for mounting casualties, and the psychological breakdown of survivors all appeared during prime time viewing hours. ABC knew they were shattering boundaries of what American television typically showed, but considered the educational value worth the potential controversy. The film's premise wasn't just about showing nuclear explosions, it was about methodically demonstrating the aftermath that military simulations and government preparations often glossed over. By focusing on ordinary citizens rather than decision-makers, The Day After forced viewers to confront questions usually left to military strategists. How would medical systems handle mass casualties? What happens when food and clean water run out? Can social order survive when all infrastructure fails? Perhaps most disturbing was the film's suggestion that surviving might be worse than dying in the initial attack. As radiation sickness claims more victims and resources dwindle, the lucky survivors face a bleak future in a contaminated landscape. The final scenes offer no neat resolution, just the ongoing struggle in a world forever changed, leaving viewers to contemplate whether such a war could ever have winners. The Day After was born from a perfect storm of Cold War tensions and network ambition. ABC Motion Pictures. President Brandon Stoddard conceived the project in 1981, just as Ronald Reagan's administration had ramped up anti-Soviet rhetoric and defense spending. While most networks were producing light entertainment, Stoddard envisioned something radically different: a brutally realistic portrayal of nuclear war's aftermath that would shake Americans out of their complacency. Finding a director proved challenging. Several filmmakers declined, fearing career repercussions from such a politically charged project. Nicholas Meyer, fresh off directing Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, ultimately accepted, drawn to the screenplay's unflinching approach. Meyer later recalled, "I thought it was important to show the unshowable, to get past all the rhetoric about nuclear war being winnable or survivable." The production immediately faced obstacles. The Pentagon refused cooperation, concerned about the film's political implications. The original script was far more graphic, running over 4 hours, but ABC executives demanded cuts to make it broadcastable.
Well, it's not my most glamorous role.
Meyer fought to preserve the film's impact while making necessary compromises, including removing scenes of nuclear attack victims with exposed bone and graphic depictions of mass suicide. Filming in Lawrence, Kansas brought its own challenges. Local residents were recruited as extras, with over 2,000 volunteers showing up to be transformed into radiation victims. Makeup artists created disturbing radiation burns and effects, working with medical consultants to ensure accuracy. Some extras found the experience so disturbing they couldn't continue. The production used actual Kansas missile silos as locations, adding to the realism. The cast, including established actors like Jason Robards and John Lithgow, alongside newcomers like Steve Guttenberg and JoBeth Williams, approached the material with grave seriousness. Robards later described it as the most difficult role of his career, noting, "This wasn't acting, this was bearing witness to what could happen to all of us." As production continued, political pressure mounted. Conservative groups condemned the film as anti-American propaganda, while others worried it might trigger unnecessary panic. ABC received thousands of letters urging them to cancel the broadcast. The network stood firm, but took unprecedented precautions, including setting up counseling hotlines for distressed viewers. The editing process became increasingly fraught as executives grew nervous about the film's impact. The original ending, showing civilization completely collapsed, was softened slightly. Even with cuts, the final product remained the most graphic depiction of nuclear war ever shown on American television. Meyer later admitted, "What aired was about 40% of what we shot. The network got cold feet." Despite the compromises, When The Day After finally reached completion, everyone involved knew they had created something unprecedented. A primetime network film that dared to show American audiences what nuclear strategists and politicians often discussed in abstract terms. As Meyer put it, we were putting faces on statistics, showing what acceptable losses actually meant. The $7 million production, enormous for a TV movie at the time, was now ready for broadcast, though no one could predict exactly how America would respond to this unflinching look at nuclear apocalypse. November 20th, 1983 became a landmark date in television history, as The Day After began broadcasting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. An estimated 100 million Americans, nearly half the country's population, tuned in, making it the highest-rated television film in history. But this wasn't just another ratings success. It was a cultural event that transcended entertainment. ABC took unprecedented precautions before airing the film. Viewers received explicit warnings about disturbing content. Programming was deliberately free of commercials during the most graphic sequences to avoid tonal whiplash. Most significantly, the network scheduled a live post-film discussion panel, including Henry Kissinger, Robert McNamara, William F. Buckley Jr., and Carl Sagan to help process what audiences had just witnessed. The immediate public reaction was stunning. Telephone hotlines established for distressed viewers were flooded with calls. Parents reported children having nightmares for weeks afterward. School counselors across America prepared special sessions to discuss the film with students. One Kansas viewer told reporters, "I couldn't sleep for 3 days. It made the unthinkable feel not just possible, but probable." Media coverage was equally intense. The film dominated newspaper headlines the following day. The New York Times called it a national trauma. Time magazine described the broadcast as the television event that shook the nation. Even international press covered the American reaction, with British papers noting that a fictional movie had achieved what anti-nuclear protesters had failed to do: force average Americans to confront nuclear war's reality. Perhaps most remarkably, the film penetrated the highest levels of government. President Ronald Reagan watched The Day After at Camp David before its public broadcast and wrote in his diary that it had left him greatly depressed and reinforced his desire to eliminate nuclear weapons. National security staff members reported the president's mood was noticeably affected for days afterward. The film's timing proved especially significant. Just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, heightening Cold War tensions. NATO's Able Archer military exercise was underway, which Soviet intelligence had mistakenly interpreted as possible preparation for a first strike. Some historians now suggest that The Day After inadvertently helped diffuse this dangerous moment by humanizing the consequences of nuclear conflict for both American leaders and citizens. Nuclear freeze activists seized the moment, organizing viewing parties and discussion groups nationwide. Membership in anti-nuclear organizations spiked dramatically in the weeks following the broadcast. College campuses reported record attendance at nuclear disarmament events. The film had transformed abstract policy debates into visceral emotional reality for millions. Not everyone embraced the message. Conservative commentators condemned the film as emotional blackmail and Soviet propaganda. The Reagan administration publicly dismissed suggestions that the movie should influence nuclear policy, though privately, officials acknowledged its impact on public sentiment. Defense contractors even produced countermaterials arguing that the film exaggerated nuclear effects. What made the broadcast truly revolutionary was that for 120 minutes, Americans across political divides shared a collective nightmare. In an era before media fragmentation, The Day After created a rare moment of national reflection about nuclear weapons that transcended partisan politics. Families discussed the unthinkable over breakfast tables. Classrooms debated deterrence theory. Church sermons addressed moral questions of nuclear strategy. For the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, nuclear war had moved from abstract possibility to visceral fear in the American consciousness. all because a network TV movie dared to show what experts had long discussed only in clinical terms. The Day After transcended typical TV movie status to become a pivotal cultural artifact of the Cold War. Its most remarkable legacy may be its influence on actual nuclear policy, something few entertainment products can claim. Reagan administration officials later acknowledged the film contributed to the president's evolving nuclear stance. In his memoirs, Reagan specifically cited the movie as strengthening his conviction to pursue nuclear arms reduction. By 1987, this shift culminated in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with the Soviet Union, the first agreement to reduce nuclear arsenals rather than merely limit their growth. The film permanently altered how media depicted nuclear war. Gone were the sanitized portrayals of the 1950s civil defense films. The Day After established a new template of unflinching realism that influenced later works like Threads, BBC's even darker take, and Testament, focusing on slow radiation deaths. In American education, the film became a teaching tool. High school history classes screened it alongside discussions of Cold War politics. Psychology researchers studied its impact on viewers' anxiety levels and risk perception, creating a new field examining media's role in shaping public policy attitudes. Perhaps most significantly, The Day After demonstrated television's unique power to create shared national experiences that prompt collective soul-searching. Before social media and streaming fragmented viewership, this single broadcast united Americans across political divides in confronting humanity's most terrifying creation. The film's cultural footprint remains visible today whenever nuclear threats reemerge in global politics, a reminder that some horrors, once seen even in fictional form, cannot be unseen. 4 decades later, The Day After remains a powerful testament to television's ability to change hearts, minds, and possibly even history. In an age of endless streaming content, it's hard to imagine any single program capturing half the nation's attention or changing a president's worldview. Yet this unassuming TV movie accomplished what countless policy papers couldn't. It made nuclear war real for ordinary Americans. Its legacy reminds us that sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones that entertain us, but the ones that terrify us into action. If you found this deep dive fascinating, hit subscribe for more explorations of media that changed our world. Drop a comment about whether you think a film could have this kind of impact today.